In accordance with these corporate purposes, the members of the Unitarian Universalist Association, dedicated to the principles of free faith, unite in seeking 1. To strengthen one another in a free and disciplined search for truth as the foundation of our religious fellowship. 2. To cherish and spread the universal truths taught by the great prophets and teachers of humanity in every age and tradition, immemorially summarized in the Judeo-Christian heritage as love to God and love to man. 3. To affirm, defend, and promote the supreme worth of every human personality, the dignity of man, and the use of the democratic method in human relationships. 4. To implement our vision of one world by striving for a world community founded on ideals of brotherhood, justice, and peace. 5. To serve the needs of member churches and fellowships, to organize new churches and fellowships, and to extend and strengthen liberal religion. And 6. To encourage cooperation with men of goodwill in every land. When the American Unitarian Association and the Universalist Church in America finally decided, after years of discussions, to formally come together and merge their two denominations into the Unitarian Universalist Association that we have today, of which this church and my congregation are a part, these were the principles that they came up with at the very first General Assembly back in 1961. If you've been attending the UU Church for several years, you probably noticed that these principles sound very different than what you hear in our churches today. And I'm willing to bet they definitely sound a lot different from what you hear in any of my sermons. The language is old-fashioned and sexist in many places. Also, and probably the biggest change that you notice, is that there are only 6 principles, whereas our churches today affirm 7 or 8 principles. The UUA back then was well aware of the challenges of merging two denominations that, although they shared many similarities, were two completely different faith traditions with their own unique histories. Also, both of these faith traditions were historically non-creedal, which means that there was no one statement of belief that each one had, which they could point to as something that the majority of their members believed. In fact, freedom of belief was one of the things that both traditions highlighted and lifted up as something that was important to them and defined them as a church. So, if you have two churches that are trying to come together as one unified entity, what do you look at to find common ground? The answer is that you were very intentional about writing those commonalities into the bylaws of your organization, which is exactly what the UUA did with its statement of principles. For those of you sitting here who are natural-born parliamentarians and fans of Robert's Rules of Order and Procedure, or you are someone who has served on the board of trustees for several different organizations and nonprofits and enjoy the organizational structure side of things, this is probably the sermon that you have been dreaming about and one that you have been waiting for me to give. Indeed, after having spent much time reading line by line through pages and pages of the UUA bylaws, I do have a special appreciation for the blood, sweat, tears, time, energy, and sheer human capital that it takes to sit down and write a comprehensive list of bylaws for a major organization. My reasons for taking the time to read the UUA bylaws is that our yearly General Assembly will be taking place this June, although many who cannot afford to make the trip, including this minister, will be joining virtually. While General Assembly is a way to come together and to meet UUs from congregations across North America, it is also a time when congregation members that have been designated as voting delegates have the opportunity to discuss and vote on a number of proposed business items on which the UUA is looking to make decisions. One of the items that has garnered a large amount of attention in UU congregations are the proposed changes and rewrites that are being made to Article 2 of the UUA bylaws. This has resulted in many UUs who are expressing concern over the fact that the UUA principles and the sources of our living tradition, which have come to mean so much to so many UUs, especially those who have left faith traditions that no longer serve them and have joined our tradition because of the principles that we deem to be important, may be rewritten or going away for good. I've even had discussions with many in my congregation about Article 2, what the vote is about, and what it means for us as a congregation. So, Like the research nerd of a minister that I am, I have decided to take the time to look at what the issue is and what is at stake, and offer up my 2 cents, whatever they may be worth.
2 cents.
Firstly, those of you who have served on the board of an organization will probably be the first to tell you that an organization is a living entity. As long as the organization continues to be in existence, it will continue to grow and change and occasionally revisit the things that it has been doing to look and see, based on what it has learned about itself and the work that it has been doing, if there are newer and better ways that it can be functioning, and to make those changes to its existing structure. This is also true of human experience as well. We learn from our mistakes and our experiences, and we work to do better. The UUA understood that there was a lot that would change about the denomination and the world that it was in over the years, and wrote into the bylaws a provision that the bylaws be reviewed and possibly rewritten every 15 years. It is through this process of renewal and revision that the language of the principles was updated to be gender neutral, and that a seventh principle was added in 1985 to reflect our explicit commitment to being responsible stewards of the environment and working towards ecological conservation. It is why the sources of our living tradition were also added to reflect the fact that our non creedal faith tradition had moved away from drawing inspiration solely from Judeo Christian sources and was embracing of other sources like Eastern religions, science and reason, and words and deeds of prophetic people throughout history. These sources were further expanded in the 1995 review and revision to include pagan and earth centered spiritualities as a source of inspiration. Secondly, when the Article 2 Study Commission was convened by the UUA in 2021 to undertake the proposed review of the bylaws that is undertaken every 15-year period, they began at looking at what was expected from Article 2, a shared agreement between congregations in the UUA bylaws. While they agreed that the main purpose of Article 2 was legal and organizational, defining who the UUA is in a legal sense and setting up the parameters of the UUA as an organization, they also identified several functions that were also expected of Article 2 for many UUs. These included helping us articulate our shared values and theology, serving as a shared cultural touchstone, listing concepts to teach and sources to draw from, serving as a personal code of ethics, having a way to explain to others who we are and to draw their interest, and being used in public situations to define our beliefs and morality in legal or political contexts. What the Article 2 Study Commission found, after consulting with a wide variety of groups within the UUA over a period of 2 years, is that both lay and professional congregation leaders to previous GA attendees, to even those that have left the faith and unchurched UUs, those who consider themselves UUs but do not belong to any particular congregation. What they were surprised to find was that many of those surveyed responded back that much of what was contained in the principles listed in Article 2 of the bylaws did not explicitly name many of the things that they felt were important to Unitarian Universalism and what had attracted many of them to our churches in the first place. An emphasis on both the process of individual and collective growth, a deeply held respect for the environment and the natural world, and an acknowledgement and a greater commitment to respecting diversity in all forms within our congregations. They also mentioned that the principles give no guidance on how we are to live these values within our congregations. The only thing it asks is a vague statement to affirm and promote certain concepts. It is for this reason that the Article 2 Study Commission recommended not completely getting rid of the principles, but reimagining them in a way that, in the words of the Commission, quote, articulates our shared values and then uses these values as grounds for aspirational statements of action. How many of you here today can name word for word the statements that make up our current set of 7 principles? If you can, you are better than I am, because even though I, as a minister, should have them committed to memory by this point, I still find myself constantly having to look up what the exact wording of each statement is. And that is exactly what the Article 2 Study Commission is trying to help change. By transitioning to 7 single word values with a short sentence or explanation, it makes our shared values easier to remember and more accessible for use as touchstones in all of our congregational discussions. It also makes them easier to remember when talking to other people about Unitarian Universalism and what it is that we hold sacred. For me, the positive changes come right at the beginning of the proposed revisions under values and covenant. Quote, love is the power that holds us together and is at the center of our shared values. We are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love. We hear the theme of love repeated so often throughout Unitarian Universalism. Side with love. Love will guide us, answering the call of love, being a people who practice radical love, loving the hell out of the world. But I feel like we do not lean into love enough as the reason by and the catalyst for what we do for people and what we do for our community and the greater world that we inhabit. Love is so intrinsic to our work and our being as UUs, and it is that love which is what distinguishes us and sets us apart for so many others. It is also what attracts people to our churches. Many are escaping toxic environments where they have been told repeatedly that they are unworthy and unlovable. And they find in us a beloved community that tells them that not only are they loved, but they always have been and will be. Every Sunday that we are here, every time that we are together, it is love that is always the guiding force for everything it is that we do. Ultimately, what I like about the proposed revision to Article 2 is how much of an active faith it makes our denomination. I have been in many brainstorming sessions within UU congregations and spaces where I have been part of a group of people who imagine and come up with great ideas and forward thinking, but without a way to realize and put into practice all of the wonderful ideas that have come about. Each of these values of interdependence, pluralism, justice, transformation, generosity, and equity each has a directly related action statement that we covenant to follow, which is dynamic and guides us forward to truly live out these shared values that we hold. We covenant to cherish the earth and all beings by creating and nurturing relationships of care and respect. With humility and reverence, we acknowledge our place in the great web of life, and we work to repair harm and damaged relationships. We covenant to learn from each other in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. We covenant to dismantle racism and all forms of systemic oppression. We support the use of inclusive democratic processes to make decisions. We covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. Openness to change is fundamental to our Unitarian and Universalist heritages, never complete and never perfect. We covenant to freely and compassionately share our faith, presence, and resources. Our generosity connects us to one another in relationships of interdependence and mutuality. We covenant to use our time, wisdom, attention, and money to build and sustain fully accessible and inclusive communities. Each of these covenant statements incorporates the same language from the set of principles that we already affirm, but reorganizes it in such a way as to be more demonstrative in what it is we deem important and how we work to realize those aims and goals in the world. The decision about whether or not these proposed revisions will become the future of our principles is one that will be voted on and decided by delegates at our yearly General Assembly this June. I cannot predict or say conclusively what the outcome will be or what the future will hold. I do still think there is debate that needs to be had regarding these revisions and what they mean for our daily operation as the UUA and for us as a free association of congregations within it. Specifically, my concerns are around things that are no longer explicitly stated within Article 2, especially respect for the democratic process that reminds us that congregational polity is the bedrock of our faith tradition. What I can say, though, is that ours is a faith tradition that has been constantly growing, learning, and evolving based on our history and our growth both institutionally and as a people of faith on our own individual journeys. If these revisions are a glimpse into our future, then I am energized and excited at the prospect of what is to come and what we can accomplish as people who will always be guided by love. May it ever continue to be so. Blessed be. Amen. Shalom. Assalamu alaikum. Namaste. Thank you all so much.